This is Associations Thrive, the podcast celebrating successful associations and their leaders. I'm your host, Joanna Pineda, CEO and Chief Troublemaker at Matrix Group International. Now, listeners, normally I interview an association or nonprofit CEO or executive director about their personal journey and the things their organization is doing differently to thrive. Today's episode is a little different. For my 100th episode, I got together with 4 other association podcasters to talk about what we're hearing from the association execs we've had on our shows, our own podcasting journeys, how associations need to be more entrepreneurial, and the looming membership cliff. We close out the podcast with some predictions for the association industry in the coming years. And don't forget to listen until the end for the bloopers. Listen and enjoy. I'll be back next week with another amazing interview with an inspiring association executive.
Everyone, this is the Battle of the 5 podcasters who got together, I don't remember, sometime last year or early this year, early in 2024, and we recorded our first joint episode where we all kind of shared what we are doing, creating podcasts and why we're creating them. And now we're back together because we have some good stuff going on, good stuff coming up, some thoughts about the future. And we know who this group is. Asin Chat, Association Chat. Kiki L'Italian is here. We have Association Thrive with Joanna Pineda, Association Strong, Dave Will, and then the Association Podcast, Ben Muscolino. Good morning, all.
And then, of course, your podcast, Reboot IT with Dave Coryell.
IT, yes. Speaking of which, what's been going on? We haven't heard much in blaming Dave Will for things. We haven't heard much from Dave and Tom with Association Strong lately. Dave, what is going on?
I think Tom and I both get super enthusiastic for short periods of time, and then we get a little lazy, especially when you're doing something that is not paying the bills. This is really just for fun. And so it's more of a volunteer thing is the way I see it. And so stuff like that sometimes falls behind the stuff that's paying the bills. But the good news is we've got like 5 more episodes booked and we're back in track as of the recording of this episode. So, it's going to come in fits and spurts, as they say.
Good. There has been a noticeable void in the podcast universe without.
Have you noticed, really?
I noticed.
Yeah. We miss you.
I'm flattered.
People miss you, Dave.
We've got some good stuff planned, though. And, Joanna, I think you've been the most, for me, out of the group here. Let's start the battle, man. You've been the most.
Make up your mind.
Yeah.
Well, I think we collectively made the decision this is not going to be a love fest. Joanna, you have been the most influential in my decision as to who to interview and the direction to go in some of the interviews. You've had some really good stuff.
Oh, interesting. Thank you.
Yeah.
And tell me why. Why is
favorite,
that? What have I done?
You introduced me to Todd Hupley, who's actually a client of ours from AAAE, American Association of Airport Executives. And he was just like fascinating. But then you just did an episode with Sandra Nam. Did I say her last name right? Nam?
Sandra Nam from Kiko Chat.
Sandra Kiko Chat. She's a vendor, like many of us, all of us.
Industry partner. We prefer industry partners.
Industry partner. And
you SaaS people are vendors.
Okay, that's another interesting conversation. Vendor, industry partner, strategic alliance partner. Anyway, so what was really interesting about your interview with her was the whole episode was basically about her product market fit. Again, I think that's on our list of things to talk about today. But yeah, you've got me thinking from your podcast. So thank you for that.
Joanna, your podcast is very rhythmic. Your production schedule is tight.
It is tight.
And your production quality is high. And you're the new kid on the block here. But not only is your production quality high, but your interview questions and your conversation, you think you'd have a team of 13 helping you produce this. I think you have a celebration coming up. Talk about that and what you have found in this initial period that you've been producing Associations Thrive.
Associations Thrive is not quite 2 years old, and in a couple of weeks, this is actually going to be the 100th episode. because my cadence is weekly. I drop episodes every Thursday, and it's hard some days, but I am so happy to tell the stories. It's interesting when you talk to chief execs every week, certain themes come out. And one theme that's on my mind is something that I'm calling the membership cliff. 3 of the CEOs in the past 6 months have talked about just a giant percentage of the members who are leaving the industry in the next 3 to 4 years. So check this out. Michael DeFrisco from Cosmetic Dentistry said that 54% of his members are basically leaving, retiring, or selling their practices in the next 3 to 4 years. Kelly Baxter from American Translator said 40%. And Devin Jopp from APIC, the infection preventionist, said same thing. Over 40% are planning to leave the profession. So, it got me thinking, is this something that's happening association-wide? Is this still part of the Great Resignation? Or is it something that's just part of the cyclical nature of associations, but because associations perhaps aren't surveying, they don't know that it's about to happen? So I've been thinking a lot about this, and I think that I want to do a webinar on this. I want to explore this further. Who's actually tracking this? Who's talking about it? And what are they doing, most importantly?
I wonder who, speaking of industry partners, who would be tracking this from our side? Who would be the partner for a lot of associations to go to study this? It's interesting.
Marketing general, because they do their MGI, don't they do the membership marketing tracking where it's about membership and associations and stuff. I was just asking this question on association chat a week ago, looking for research because there was a conversation about this topic and we were like, where do we go? What is it? And somebody was like, oh, MGI. And I was like, does it have that kind of information? I don't know if it goes in depth to actually answer the why though. But as far as the tracking membership, is it increasing or decreasing in associations across all of the different associations? It's like they do track membership numbers and whether it's trending up or trending down, but it doesn't explain why.
I'm always a little interested in the dichotomy between the professional society and the trade association too, because we see it in our market. There's consolidation that happens in some markets. So it may have less to do with the number of professionals and maybe practices, for example, are coming together. So if you're measuring the number of organizational members that you have, it may be that private equity has reared its head into yet another market and they've bought 11 providers and now it's one line item for the association. So anyway, I like this topic as well. It's interesting. The why is interesting.
Yes.
It's in trades and in professional societies, as you say, is it what's going on with technology shifting jobs and where people are seeing the future for what they're doing in their professions? Are they closing down businesses because they're shifting how they're positioning all of this? Is it the bowling alone thing where it's like there just aren't as many people joining anymore because they're not into associations and seeing the value anymore? I mean, what is it? So it's fascinating. Joanna, I'm so glad that you're doing this. I'm going to be interested in seeing what you uncover.
McKinsey's a research firm.
Yeah.
I'm not super familiar with them.
They would be another one. I think you're right, Dave.
Mm-hmm.
Well, it's kind of interesting because we're talking about MGI and we're talking about McKinsey. And the question is ASAE tracking this too? Because this is potentially a trend that will affect and influence potentially all of their members. So that's kind of interesting. I mean, Kiki, you and I helped to promote the Association Latinos survey that they're doing because they were looking for the demographic information, not just about Latinos in the association community, but overall. So they've got the survey that they have up right now to say, what's the makeup of our association community, not just in terms of ethnicity, but gender, sexual orientation, but also how long have you been in the industry, in an association, who's in a C3 versus a C6 versus a whatever, and who's an industry partner, and what kind of growth have you seen?
Right.
Really interesting stuff. So maybe there's an increased interest in getting this kind of data. And increasingly, I think organizations are saying, if it's not out there, I'm going to get it.
I think you're right. I think we're seeing that. That's a great example. I mean, I'm really glad that survey's out there, that we're going to get that information too. But it does make you ask the question, not to gang up on the obvious, right? But it's like, why isn't this something that we have already? Why isn't this already research that seems kind of important? I mean, it seems like it's something that is an evergreen sort of interest and resource that we'd all need access to.
I think there's a lot of information out there, especially if you go to the foundation. And Joanna, you mentioned ASAE. There is a lot already going on, a lot of research the foundation puts on that. And I'm just going to say, I don't think a lot of associations or industry partners use. There's already a bunch of stuff that when I talk sometimes to clients or association execs or other industry partners, and I say, hey, have you looked at Foresight Works? Have you looked at these change models? And so they're like, I don't know what you're talking about. And there's a lot of energy and effort going into this data, this information for us all to use. And then what can happen is we can look for the thing we're talking about seems to be the whole, right?
Right.
So it is interesting. And Kiki, you mentioned that on Association Chat, you were talking about this recently. I want to get back and then get to Ben too about what's going on with your podcast. You're making some changes.
Okay. So change number one is that I have changed the format for what I'm doing. I'm not just doing the long form interviews anymore, but I am doing an update every week. That's like, the goal is to be under 30 minutes and actually really aiming for it to be like around 13 to 15 minutes. And it's just an update on what's happening. I'm answering a question or two. It's short, but it's something that is, I think, it's just me and it's not the more long form interview. And I'm also going to break up the interviews into easier to digest segments, because that's also been an issue, I think, where it's like something that's 45 minutes or an hour, person could be absolutely fascinating, but oh my God, if you're not on the treadmill at that point,
Right.
it's like, I don't know if you're going to finish it.
Can I ask you say segments? Do you mean different episodes with a segment in each episode? Okay.
Yep. So I've done a few weeks of doing the shorter episodes. And then this week will be one where I'm doing a longer, where people can do the live stream and ask their questions. I'll have my shorter. And then I'm going to have the edited segments, the edited episodes of the longer one that comes out that is easier for people to digest, with the goal being that I don't upload to the audio podcast. I know that this is getting in the weeds for people who don't necessarily follow it, but what I used to do is I used to interview people, live stream it, minimal editing, and then I would just upload the audio to Libsyn, which is what I use, and then that'd be the audio done, right? And now, instead of that, I am doing the live stream interview so that people have a chance to ask questions of the guest. However, I'm not uploading that part automatically to the audio podcast. What I'm doing instead is I'm cutting that up into little pieces and having it in shorter episodes. Also taking the time to correct some of the audio. I'm learning from my hanging out with you all.
I listen
and
to
so it's like inspiring me to do some different things.
Your hybrid meeting short form. I thought it was great. I love that new format because I walked away. I don't do events, right? We're not a meeting company, but I walked away understanding both the challenges and some solutions to potential challenges of the hybrid meeting. So I really liked it.
I'm so glad. And it's like, because I was hanging out with all of you, and then I started thinking, okay, so working on that list, having the directory of the podcast, I thought I need to stay up to speed on what everyone's doing. And so I started listening to all these different association podcasts, yours, of course, right? But then on this list to see, well, what's everyone doing? Then I started thinking like, I really need to be putting out like, what's the best of the best this week? Not everybody has a chance to like go through and like listen to all of it and has an excuse to do it. I do now because I have to like update this directory. So it's like, okay, so what's the best of the best? Which do you really listen to? And I mean, I always include one of my episodes, like at the last one, because of course, I'm
why not?
Awesome. I'm like, you're going to have to watch, but so really it's the top 4 and then plus Kiki's. The top 4 though, it's been really good. I've had a chance to really share some great association podcasts, and I actually have found a couple as a result of it that I didn't know about, where it's like, even if they
put them probably on your list, right?
Added to the list. So if you go to the directory on associationchat.com and you look at the podcast directory, go down associationchat.com, look on the directory, and you'll see when it was most recently updated. And then like for the ones in June, like the most recent, they're added to the list. And in addition to putting out the newsletter of the week's top 5 association podcasts, I have the Spotify playlist where I put them all up on the playlist. So if you are subscribed to that.
Yeah, that is brilliant.
Thank you. If you are subscribed to that, you can just listen to all 5 of them in a row. And then that's that week. And then each week it's updated with the next week's top 5.
It would be awesome to see how the syndicated, consolidated list performs.
I know.
Yeah, and what kind of influence you have for recommending other podcasters and podcast episodes.
These are great questions, and I'm so new into it that I don't even know. Like, we'll see. But I'll tell you at the outset, some of the benefits that I didn't necessarily plan on, but I probably should have, has been the ability to cross promote. Because as I'm able to promote what's going on in others, it also is, of course, like it comes back and it's like, oh yeah, association chat, top 5 pods, which, obviously that would happen, but I didn't think about it that way. I actually put it together because I'm like, I really need to do more with this directory and I really need to put out regular content. It's sustainable for me to do this, right? And
That's
so,
the key.
yeah.
And I am sure the association podcast is on that list.
Of course.
Ben and Jake and Gretchen, who was the temporary guest 3 years ago and still in the other. I'm actually recording with Gretchen later. I finally got time. I don't know how you do it. I finally got time with a Delcorian peer team member here to record. But Ben, you seem to get all the time. What's going on with the association podcast?
And you got to get Gretchen on the website since she's now a permanent host.
She's been on the website for a little while now. Yeah.
Okay, good.
She's up there. Yeah, she's up there. Yep. It's really fun. And in fact, Joanna, something that stood out about your story and your podcast, and by the way, thank you for coming on in May. Your episode was incredible, is the idea that you have chief executives on pretty exclusively. And we kind of did a call to really embody what we're trying to do, which is to tell people's journeys through the association market. And of course, Jake and Gretchen are like, your video's too long, Ben. And I'm like, look, guys, I'm trying to help. But what I did was I got in and I said, can someone please recommend people down staff, right? People that have only been in the space for a year, a few years, someone that works in the membership team or marketing team that may never have a chance to go to the conference or speak on another podcast. And let's showcase some of those people. And so I think that there are several conversations with all of you that have kind of inspired us to double down on our mission of being able to kind of expose, if you will, the various journeys that people take into and through the association market. And of course, we still have executives that join us, but making sure that we keep an eye down market and down staff, if you will. We were talking before, we have a weekly recording time that we reserve. And of course, we end up pushing or canceling a few of those. We did put 4 out in May, but the frequency, I will say, Kiki, I love the idea of breaking some of yours up. We did a double episode with Wes because it just went too long and it performed very, very well. We broke it up shorter and we always try for this 30-minute podcast and it always ends up being 40 to an hour because we just have so much fun with the guests that we have. But we're very excited going into the summer. We've got a lot of momentum. We're really not discussing, Dave, the fact that Gretchen was supposed to be a temporary guest. We're just going to never say anything and hope that she never decides to leave us. So I have this idea that we have a resident.
Yeah.
We had a resident.
She's a resident
for a short period of time. You don't have to stay forever, but have a residency on the association podcast.
Build a set.
And we had a whole list of guest hosts that we wanted to have on. And I was like, let's get Gretchen first. And then we just never brought it up for 9 episodes. And we're like, you're not. We don't have anybody else that we called yet. You want to stay. So we're so thankful that she stayed with us and that somehow the 3 of us find the time.
There's one other topic that we brushed over fairly quickly. And Kiki, I think what you're doing is pretty cool so if I understood this correctly, you have the long form, but then you're chopping it up into medium size, including video, but then also soundbite, social media sort of stuff. I think it's really interesting because then people can tap into the length that they're interested in. Whereas I think the rest of us are more we just do what's convenient for us or maybe what we think the market as a whole wants. I mean, for me, which raises the question of what's the most popular? And I always hate doing this because I'm a man of personalization. So I don't like the idea of just giving the entire market one thing, but that's what I do with podcasts. what is the right duration of a podcast? I've heard anything from 10 to 15 minutes for a podcast, all the way up to the Tim Ferriss podcast, which was 3 hours long. Joe Rogan, the same way. I tend to be 40 minutes to an hour because I feel like that's the average length of a commute or a workout.
Yeah,
and it's
I do
also
half
the right
an
amount
hour.
of time to go deep on something.
So
Yeah,
I'm
I'll
with-
tell
I'm
you,
with
Dave, I do
JP.
half an hour because I've heard from people, they say, ooh, that one was a little bit long when it was
Yeah.
over 30 minutes. So I do half hour less. Occasionally I'll do 33 minutes. It's quick. You feel like you're done. And then if you listen to it at 1.2 speed, you're done in
I
22
do
minutes
like
or
that.
something.
I do like listening at 1.2 or 1.5,
I do
even
too.
depending on the host and the guest. But Dave, well, I think it's a function of value still, just like everything. The same thing that somebody, either Kiki or Joanna, said earlier about people not, I think it was you, Kiki, about folks not joining associations because they're either not joiners, they're not finding the value in it. And that's it. That's the same with a podcast. I'll listen to a 2-hour episode. I might have to break it up. Whatever the value proposition is, either entertainment, information, educate, whatever it is. But once it starts listing, I'm off. I'm like, okay. And even at the higher speed, we try to shoot for a half an hour because I feel like I can get my points across and the guest can explain whatever they're explaining within a half hour. And beyond that, you're done walking the dog and you got to cut it short. So that's the only way I can figure out what to do with the time. And we are doing something similar with Reboot IT. I want to ask you all two things. One, this isn't a question part, but we are going to do some shorter pieces under the theme of Dave gets worked up about, because those tend to get listened to, but I can't be
Those
worked
are
up
popular.
for half an hour, 40 minutes. So I'm going to get worked up for about 12 minutes at a time from now on.
I love that you can just decide this ahead of like, you're only going to get worked up for like this amount of time.
I'm going to get worked
It'll
up.
be better
work
for
it
your
out.
heart health to not get worked up for so long. Yeah.
And you know me, I'm such an anxious Andy that, 11 minutes of getting worked up is probably enough.
We
for
hit
anyone.
12. We hit 12. I'm done being worked up now.
The other thing I'm thinking about, though, is changing the name of Reboot IT, because I feel like the challenge is that people think it's a technology podcast when it is. But if you start listening to the guests, it's not about technology, right? It's about all the other pieces, governance. It is sometimes about the technology when I have CTOs or engineers on, keeping up with Microsoft. It's more about everything that goes along with having the technology, the licensing, the education, the professional development, the governance piece. So I don't know that Reboot IT does what it needs to do. So we're playing with other names like Reboot IT All, like Reboot It All. I don't want to lose it completely. I love the reboot part, but do you think it would be a mistake?
I always thought that Reboot IT, I liked that it was also a play on reboot it, like just reboot it in general. And isn't that kind of what Reboot IT All would kind of be? Reboot it all.
Mm-hmm. Reboot it all.
So it already is.
Sounds like
it's inherently all very human centered, right? Because the IT is something that courses through the veins of all of our businesses. And yet it's all about what the person and people are doing with or not doing with all of these things. And we're trying to get people on to talk about what they have done or haven't done or what's worked and what hasn't and how to fix that thing. Or like Kiki with her format, do we tinker, right? Do you tinker with the name of your podcast? Do you tinker with the format?
I think you always have to be tinkering.
Dave looks
I'm tinkering with my
absolutely,
format
but
furrowed brow.
But the human element is like, that's who we're talking to about these other things. And so, yeah, I get it. I mean, I know because I've listened to enough of them, like you have these like incredible conversations, but maybe, I don't know. Does IT sound too IT forward? I'm not sure.
Well, I think Prop Fuel needs to weigh in, because if there's a brand that doesn't connect to like we've talked about this on your podcast, I kidded you about renaming Prop Fuel to something that more about member engagement. And you're like, no, it's Prop Fuel. Right.
But so Prop Fuel used to be about giving props. It was more focused as an internal platform towards staff for acknowledgement and measurement of those things. And now it's just a prop as a propeller that's propelling his incredible company. So
fueling member engagement. So, but listen, that's not the topic here. The topic is about how I think we tend to put more emphasis on our stuff than the rest of the world does. Here's the thing. I don't think people care about the name. They get used to something and they're comfortable with it. You ever put on a pound or two or 3 or 4 and you look at yourself or you weigh, okay, Dave hasn't. He's never struggled with weight. Look at him. He's the most physically fit person over the age of 50 that I've ever
40.
met, probably. But
like,
I know when I put on a couple pounds, I'm like, oh my God, I feel like I feel huge. And then when I lose weight, I'm like, look at me. I've lost 3 pounds. Check out these abs, right? Whereas nobody else notices. Like nobody notices that stuff. We're the only ones that notice. And I think that's what's happening with your name here, Dave.
But every one of you and most of the others have association. Like you just mentioned the Association 100 podcast in the chat. Association Tribe, the Association Podcast, Association Strong, Association Chat. I'm the only one that doesn't have association in my name.
But don't you think that's good?
I do think it's good. I mean, I did it intentionally in the beginning, right?
Yeah.
And we were trying to we were going to call it Control Alt Delete. That was already taken. We had other things, and that was a little too nerdy, Control Alt Delete. And what about the Mac people, right? So we didn't go in that direction. But I am concerned when people hear Reboot IT, there's not even a chance they're going to listen because they're a CEO or they're a person that doesn't deal with IT the way, that's my concern.
Mm-hmm.
I wonder if this was a conversation in some element of it when Joanna was working on your website recently, because in some ways, isn't Delcor just pretty synonymous with association? We all just know it, but we can't assume that, I guess, right? And if the executive at Delcor is having all of these conversations, it can be IT related, but so I don't know. I think you have a lot of leeway to get creative because I think people are going to continue to listen anyway, Dave.
What's interesting here, though, is the 4 of us, Kiki and Joanna and Ben and I, have podcasts that are all targeting the CEOs and the membership team. You actually are the only one that, by definition, has a podcast that's targeting the CIO, the CTO. And so I find it interesting. Yes, but you just said, is the CEO going to listen to this if it's Reboot IT? I would argue that your target audience is... I guess I would ask, who is your target audience? And if you get a little too close in terms of your name, this goes in that topic I wanted to talk about, product market fit. But if you take that name, you make it any closer to what the 4 of us have, now there's 5 of us competing for the same ears, right? Yeah. So I think you're in a beautiful spot. I really like the differentiator. I really like the niche. And I've always been a person that believes in focusing on a niche when you want to win something like yours.
I appreciate the focus group. Dave, Will, I think you're right. There is definitely something there. Maybe a slight modification might be coming, but I think you're right. And we purposefully left the association word out of it. And I don't know if that was smart or not, but we did. Dave, you also have another that ties into this. You have another podcast, the Entrepreneurs Podcast, EEO 360, that is a huge podcast. And there's 2 things in here. One, the conversation you and Joanna were having through our WhatsApp group about entrepreneurship in the association community. And 2, the post that was just on, and Ben, you alluded to this, or you mentioned this earlier, evaluating the success of your podcast and whether or not you're accomplishing what you're trying to accomplish. Is it just listeners to you? Is it translating into business, et cetera? I think there's a huge window that people look through when they try to figure out whether or not their podcast is quote unquote successful. I'm going to start and just say, for me, it just goes back to, do I feel like whether I have 18, 180, or 1,800 listeners on an episode, do I feel like I put good information in the community that will get referenced and findable for those who really need that information? And I can't focus too much on the listenership, only because it seems to be such a roller coaster, episode to episode, of who listens. And that could be a function of so many things besides topic or my hosting. So 2 things here: entrepreneur and association, the conversation you were having, and how does that tie into, well, that doesn't. We'll get to the other part later.
So I alluded to this earlier. Joanna mentioned that she had just released this episode with Sandra Num from Kiko Chat. So I listened to that episode over the weekend, and it's really interesting to hear Sandra's journey in creating this platform she has, which she calls a marketplace. A big part of the podcast was saying, so what is this again? What problem does it solve? And how does it fit into the marketplace? How does it compare to something like Andy's buyer's guide? And she's like, yeah, it's like a buyer's guide, on steroids. But what really piqued my interest was her journey of trying to find product market fit. And I don't know that she has. I don't know that she hasn't, but it's sometimes hard to realize when you've hit product market fit because I think there's a lot of varying definitions of it. I know as entrepreneurs, we're all very, very focused. I know I am very focused on product market fit, which essentially is like, when do you know you've actually solved a relevant problem? And how do you know that you've got the right product for the market that you're serving?
There's funny answers to that, but keep going.
Are they like dad jokes or are they funny?
No, there's funny, like I can just have a wave of something that reinforced something that I was doing well as I was doing it very poorly because my customers didn't fire me. And I was like, why aren't they firing me? And it was because I was in the right place at the right time with the right thing. And they were like, we don't really have anywhere else to go, so we're going to stay with you, even though you're not doing a very good job for us. And it forced me to double down. And so for me, that was a market indicator because I was like, man, if I was them, I would fire me right now. And they're not. And I started doing kind of a listening tour and they're like, we don't know what else to do. And I'm like, well, okay. I mean, this was a few years ago now, but
revenue and churn have a lot to do with product market fit. And, for most organizations that am I selling stuff and are people continuing to buy it or use it? And now, depending on the product, those words are going to vary. But what I thought was really interesting in the conversation Joanna and I started to have over WhatsApp this weekend was, this is something that I think associations need to be thinking about more in terms of driving revenue. All associations think about revenue. The fact that it's nonprofit doesn't matter. Every association's thinking about revenue in terms of dues, the conference engagement, in terms of our conference tickets, and in terms of certifications. And then you look at an episode that Tom and I did in Association Strong with Todd Hopley, who's the CEO of AAAE, American Association of Airport Executives. I mentioned him earlier. And this guy, you can't say single-handedly, he wouldn't say that either, but he led the organization from 27 million actually to 107 million in 5 years. And by the way, Joanna, thank you for that introduction to Todd. And now it's at 130 million. And we can go into the details of where all that money's coming from, but less than 2% of it comes from member dues. So he's an example of somebody I think that is running that organization like a business, thinking about it like an entrepreneur. Hence also his title of CEO as opposed to executive director, which is a more progressive definition of the same role. So anyway, that's a topic I think is really, really interesting. And I don't think association leadership is educated enough on the topic of product market fit.
Well, if you think about it, every association has to constantly reinvent itself. I mean, I think we in the for-profit sector, we're explicit about it, right? I have told my team I'm in a period of reinvention right now, hang on for the ride. And the question is how many associations and nonprofits think that way too? Maybe they need to be CEOs, chief entrepreneurship officers, right? And thinking about how do we infuse our organizations with new ideas that are relevant to what our members need? And how do we test out ideas? I mean, you all are probably doing this. We're constantly doing this. I'm constantly in conversation with clients about ideas, and some things fall completely flat. And then we go, well, that sounded like a good idea, but clearly there's no market for it. And then other times you hit the jackpot and you think, okay, I have something new that I now can offer to my clients. But are associations thinking explicitly that way about the new conference, about the new research, about the new certification?
Oh, experimentation is such a huge part of it because you can come out with a product that you think is amazing, like absolutely amazing, and nobody buys it.
Absolutely.
Or your mother buys it and a couple friends buy it, and then they don't buy it a second time. Ben, you alluded to the startup of Prop Fuel back in the day. That's what happened with our company. We started a business where my partner and I thought the product was awesome. And it actually worked well, but it didn't really solve a big enough problem for people to want to buy it. And so we transitioned and pivoted, as you would say in the entrepreneurship world. And that's what Sandra from Kiko Chat is doing. That's what you're talking about right now. We all do it. And the question is, are associations experimenting enough so that they stumble upon the right products that make them real money. Speaking of
Dave, I don't think it's just about money. I'm not sure that I agree with that.
I didn't say just about money. Money is the measure.
But it has to be where they invest their time and money. Well, I think it goes back to measurement, though, right? Like if you can measure the consumption, because one thing that associations do very well, I suppose, in a lot of cases, but just more than anyone else, is they generate content, right? Whether it's professional development and so on and so on and so on. But are they measuring like the consumption of that, then measuring the value, and then saying, is this something they should get, or is it something they should pay for? In addition to, and some of that, like that measurement, because you can tinker all you want. And I might look at somebody across the street and say, oh, that's a great car. I would buy that car. But would I really? Did I?
I'm curious to hear, Joanna. I just want to clarify. The money to me is the ultimate measurement of product market fit. So I'm curious why you think it ultimately doesn't come down to the revenue.
Well, it ultimately has to come down to revenue. But like I just had an amazing interview with Jennifer Abril from SACMA. What was interesting about that was she said, we're doubling down on B2B marketing services. And she said they have something called lead sheets where anybody from outside can actually sit down with a SACMA staff person and fill out a lead sheet that's been QA'd, and then it gets sent out to the members. And she said that from their definition, it's been almost 300 leads that have gone to members, and about 54% have actually gone to members. And I said, are you charging for this? And she said, no, but it's driving membership.
Yeah, so they are charging for it. It's called membership dues.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. But it's not necessarily the quote non-dues revenue. And then the other thing that she said was fascinating was she said they sold their trade show several years ago because it was taking up too much time. It was overwhelming the organization, and they sold it for a huge sum. But she said then something was lost in the industry. The members for a decade said, we wish we had the show back because it was the kind of the safe space for us to gather and find partners. So they waited out the non-compete and bought another show. So again, they thought it was all about revenue, but it was about where the industry gathers. So they brought it back.
I think we're both saying the same thing. Ultimately,
I agree.
The final measurement, though, is dues revenue. And if they're not providing that connection, as Kiki said in the chat here, the connection for their members, and there's not enough value, people won't renew. And they brought that back, not because they missed the revenue from the conference. They brought it back because it was providing member value and therefore driving renewals of dues.
And also then as a trade show being a successful trade show that drives revenue. So everything is kind of working together. But it was interesting that they had to come back to that place.
What a fun moment, though, to say when maybe the conference gets a little too expensive and you get to look back, because not everybody gets this chance. You just struggle through it. And they say, yeah, I know it's expensive, but remember, we lost it last time, right?
Right.
Let's not give it away again. Because if we drive price down, this becomes a burden for the organization again, and it goes away. We already did that once. So everybody pony up, right? If the value's there, let's make sure that we're pricing it and valuing it appropriately. And most people don't get a chance to do that in their business. Right?
What they're doing, though, is this is experimenting. Experimenting isn't just trying new things, but experimenting might be cutting things too.
Kiki, you've been really quiet, but you added some stuff in the chat here.
Yeah, it's an interesting discussion because I think that, well, for a number of reasons, but I think that one of the arguments that I've been hearing in the industry is just about this. We need to be reminded about the dues revenue. We need to be reminded about it is about the member value, in that circling all the way back to our initial discussion about why are some of these, what do we call it, membership cliffs happening?
The membership cliff, right?
Membership cliff. Why is this happening? One of the big discussions is that there's been so much of a focus on bringing the money to the mission, no money, no mission, and all of that with associations. There's been so much of a focus on acting like commercial enterprises that there's been a loss of the importance around the value of membership as it pertains to belonging, community. A lot of the decision-making has been centered around this idea of we need to operate more like a business. And I know that that's something that the pendulum swings back and forth as far as how the philosophy in the industry is, the prevailing thought on how we should think about this. But Michael Tatanetti actually brought up
pricing guy. That's how I know him, the pricing guy.
Pricing guy. Yeah. So, but Michael Tatanetti said, yes, non-dues revenue is very exciting and important, but I think we need to focus on the dues revenue, because I think that a lot of what's missing and a lot of what people aren't getting from their associations anymore is where the value is in the dues. What are we paying dues for? Why are we members of this association versus just getting something from a for-profit? Why is this different?
And I think this is a really interesting, I hope others, but again, I'm getting a lot of value out of listening to you I want to make sure we segue into what do we want associations to do about this conversation we're having, right? That's what
also, I'd love some crazy predictions about the future for associations. I got a couple.
Yeah. So Ben, I'm not sure where you were going next, but I would like to, after that, get to, all right, so you've had this conversation about EO and market fit and so on, about entrepreneurship. I do want to get to that. Then we can get to the future and then wrap up with a couple of other things.
I was going to bring up briefly, and this is probably a whole episode in itself, but I've always kind of looked from afar and said, well, associations are actually very much like software companies, like a SaaS company, in that they have that recurring membership revenue, and then the non-dues revenue is sort of the implementation versus the SaaS. And it is very interesting because you have to stay vigilant, even as a SaaS company, to make sure there continues to be value, good support, all of those things. And I used to very much subscribe to, and there's cases made on all sides, but for the sake of argument, like I like the idea of tinkering and kind of adding or removing things from membership and allowing for more add-ons for a number of reasons, but it allows people to have a bit more of an ad hoc approach, lower the barrier of entry to make sure you get that recurring still, and then allow people to scale up. But I also, as someone that's just a lifetime kind of sales study over here, the alternate choice close of how do I want to engage with this organization is, I think, so important too, because it's not whether I want to be involved or not. It's like, how do I want path A or path B? But Kiki, to hear that the conversation you were having was like, we have to refocus back on membership. It is the most forecastable. It is the most financially valuable. I mean, the fact that these are nonprofits, are they able to get owned by private equity? Because if so, they would have valuation multiples like the software companies in our space. And yet that's not their goal, right? To get sold, if you will. And I just want to bring that topic up because I think it's fascinating. It's about the idea that we have to stay on top of the value within our recurring. When we're building our software companies and creating value and figuring out how we do that, like, are the associations as vigilant about adding or removing a feature as we are in our software?
Are they experimenting, right? We're getting at the same thing, which is really about experimenting with the ultimate value proposition.
Yeah.
And I like
SaaS
the way the
comparison is
analogy
what I wanted to
you have
bring
there of adding features, because you can do that without doing a whole new version of membership. You can add a feature to it and see how it goes. So maybe that's the answer to the question, Ben. You started the thread of how can associations take what we just talked about and experiment, as you were saying, Dave, as part of the entrepreneurial side, because entrepreneurs are different. We got to keep in mind, right? There's a difference. Like, I consider myself a business owner, frankly, more than an entrepreneur. I'm not recreating the way an old business used to work. Like, Dave, you're the EO guy, right? So you're the EO person who really knows the definition of entrepreneur. But I always think of it as somebody who's inventing something new, where this company, Delcor, right? We're consulting and we're also improving MSP services in the space. We're making them better. Is that an entrepreneur? I don't know. I don't really care. I'm not going to get wrapped around the axle about the word, but associations have a core mission and vision, and they have business objectives. They probably shouldn't be incredibly entrepreneurial to mess with that mission, but they should be tinkering and adding features to experiment and increase value. Maybe that's the way I would take a look at it.
The experimentation is certainly around features and benefits, but it's also around how they're communicated. That's a product market fit. You can have the right product, and if you're not communicating it well to the market, so they're not buying it, then it's a fail. And so you got to have the right product, you got to have the right market, and you need to communicate that correctly. And that's what makes it such a balancing act, is if you have the right product and nobody's buying it, is it because of the messaging or is it because of the product? Or is it because you're selling it to the wrong people? So it's very, very difficult, this whole product market fit thing. It's really, really hard, which makes it kind of
maybe this is a good topic for the five of us to have a product market fit guest on with us and focus on it with an association exec too, and do a pod around that. Everyone is nodding. Can you hear that,
I think
everyone?
That's a great idea. That sounds like fun.
Let's move on to what Joanna mentioned earlier, the predictions. Joanna said she had a couple.
The reason I wanted to do predictions is because, it's my 25th anniversary year. And I said that I want to devote one episode each month to thinking about the future. So I'm having execs on to talk about the future of the industry or their profession, and then talk about how their organizations are adapting. So it's a little bit of market fit and reinvention and experimentation again. So I got a couple of predictions. I think we're going to see a wave of CEO retirements, and I think we're going to see a wave of association mergers. That's just my prediction. And it's hard for associations to merge, but I think what we're seeing, and I think this is a little bit of fallout from the pandemic, but I think what's happening is that organizations really do have to change what they're doing and how they're doing it. And the ones that aren't doing it are failing, and their dues aren't really lasting them the way they used to, because they used a lot of their dues during the pandemic. So I think we're going to see some mergers.
I love that.
Mergers and retirements.
Isn't it funny to think about the merging of associations? So I've been in the middle of a few of those with some customers, and they're bad at it. I actually don't think it's that hard. I think it's like trying to move in with somebody, though. And like, you kind of need to,
I think it's hard. I think for-profits struggle with it too, because it's two organizations, two cultures.
Yeah. There's a lot of ego.
I think that in the nonprofit space, though, people are very sentimentally attached to the things that they've done and not the things that they're doing. Well, they are to the things that they're doing, but they're also very attached to the things they've done. Whereas in for-profit, they are like, this is where we want to be in 5 years, right? Because a lot of times it's private equity and they're like, we all just want to get rich. Well, let's make sure we do a good job, but they're not looking backwards. They're not like, well, I can't throw that. It's like moving in with somebody. Like, I can't throw that t-shirt away. I got that at Disney World with my parents. That goes on with associations, and it doesn't in corporate America as much.
What are yours, Ben?
I think it's an interesting time again to take a look at the for-profit side and really gauge how it impacts what's going on with the health of our customers, because I see private equity money coming back in last year and this year again. And old private equity that's been sitting around for 5 to 7 years at some of these great companies that, the private equity cycle is about to reset. And so are they going to buy somebody and recap, or are they going to sell? And then they have fresh private equity money. And what does private equity like to do in the first few years? They like to deploy capital. And what does that mean? And it makes me excited and nervous at the same time. So I think there's going to continue to be more consolidation on the for-profit side. And I'd love to explore the cause and effect, like if one's driving the other, between what Joanna's talking about and on the nonprofit side versus what's happening on the for-profit side. There's got to be similarities, and maybe there's a cause and effect across those. I don't know.
Dave, Will, do you have any predictions?
My prediction is that we're not going to see any prediction-worthy changes in our industry. I mean, that's it in a nutshell. And in fact, I think we all like to talk about change because it's exciting. And we always want to talk about either the things that impact us really positively or really negatively. But the reality is most change, with the exception of a few rare things over the course of history, most change happens very, very, very incrementally.
Small increments, yeah.
And it's almost unnoticeable. Big changes would include like ChatGPT a year and a half ago, or back in, 2022. But you look at it, self-driving cars, for example, like everybody's predicting this stuff. Even Elon is saying like, we're going to have self-driving cars really, really soon, but it's not really, really soon.
We have them in San Francisco.
Okay. We've been working on those since 1980.
That's
right?
true, but
so
you can now hail a driverless taxi in San Francisco.
So if you were to ask me in 1980 what changes we're going to see in that industry, it's going to be like, well, maybe in 40 years, we're going to have some experimental self-driving cars in San Francisco. So,
well, we're having a discrepancy in predictions worthy of mentioning, right? And timeline, but I'm going to go quickly. I'm going to say we're going to see a lot of new associations for different communities that didn't exist 10 years ago. We're actually going to see, and I've thought about this, the association of influencers, et cetera, because there are industries that have been created and are being created that need a professional society because we're seeing what's happened without them. We know the value of associations, the power of associations. And then the other one is we're going to see an association that is created by and run by nothing but artificial intelligence, the American Association of Artificial Intelligence Robots or whatever. That could happen. So let's see. Kiki, what do you bring us home here?
I think that we're going to actually, unfortunately, see a lot more competition and conflict between for-profits and nonprofits. I think the associations are going to see a lot more of a fight for the people who would have been members of them in the past. I think that they're going to see a lot more competition at for-profits for exactly those same members. And I think that because of that, there are going to be people who are looking for new approaches, but there's also going to be a lot of people making poor decisions because of fear and having to work with these cultures that have been around for a long time in these associations where the benefit has been that longevity. It's now also going to be one of the detriments where that's going to get in the way of them thinking a little bit more in depth about what belonging to an association and nonprofit really means. Fun stuff.
It is fun stuff. We've all been having fun in this community for a long time. Not all of us. Some of you are younger. Looking at you, Ben. In any event, I look forward to the next gathering of the Collabicast group here so that we can continue to share not only what we're learning through our podcast, but in the community. We'll see you cats in 3D at Annual.
Yeah.
Thanks for listening to Associations Thrive. We're so glad to have you here. You know, my personal mission and the mission of my company, Matrix Group International, is to help associations and nonprofits increase membership, generate revenue, and thrive in the digital space. I want to hear stories of how your organization is thriving in today's challenging landscape. Please apply to be on my show by going to podcast.matrixgroup.net. By the way, do you need help with a digital initiative? Maybe it's a website redesign, a new membership database, or a hybrid meeting that you're planning. I'd love to connect with you. Please visit the Matrix Group website at matrixgroup.net. Thanks again for listening to this week's episode of Associations Thrive. Don't forget to subscribe to the show, leave a 5-star rating, post a comment, and share it with your colleagues and friends. Bye!
Ben, are you still with us?
Yeah, I'm good.
I've never seen you this quiet for that long.
So that was you guys.
You don't have bourbon next to you.
Yeah, I have like the taps behind me, but I've got could you see that, Kiki?
The taps?
We saw the taps.
Taps. Yeah. Oh, when you said bourbon, I literally have like a.
Who said bourbon? Someone said
did.
Bourbon?
I said, you don't have bourbon next to you, but you do. Oh my God.
It's always within reach.
Wait, hang on. I got to take a screenshot.
I was worried. I was like, yeah, what's going on? But I'm not worried anymore. I know you're just fine.
Okay, last time we all recorded together, we got an explicit rating. Let's be careful.
Oh my God, really?
Yes, we did.
I see where this is going.
Really?
That's Kiki's fault.
All right, let's stick with the battle.
I know why.
Speaking of residents, a lot of people think of me as the resident dad joke guy. And
I don't think anyone
there's been
does.
No, I think you guys were asking.
I've never heard that.
If I had any
I've never heard
jokes.
that. Has anyone else ever heard that?
That's strange. I don't know.
I'm curious though. Do you guys know why the son didn't go to college? Why didn't the son go to college? Because it's already got 1 million degrees. It's so hot on the sun.
We're going to have to start keeping a jar and just like making him put $1 in it every time, right?
And speaking of experiments, do you know how a scientist freshen their breath?
Oh boy, here we go.
You know it with experiments.
I mean, where's the jar? How do we make this like, oh my gosh.
No, hey, Dave.
Hey, Dave, what, David?
What do you call a line of rabbits, a whole row of rabbits marching backwards? It's a receding hairline.
Yes,
that's right.
A working on hair. Clearly, hair was involved.
And you're not going to be able to edit that one out either.
I think I can. All right, you've set down the gauntlet.
Dave, thank you
all.
Thank you. Yes.
Another fun episode. You guys are amazing.